Good day. And today we're going to be taking a look at the Mosin Nagant M91. Why are we taking a look at this particular weapon today? Well, that's because the Mosin Nagant M91 is a great example as to why surplus arms are a great investment. Now, if you're like me, you have a wide variety of hobbies. You're a computer nerd, which means you have to have the greatest graphics card known to man so you can run Wolfenstein New World Order on all high. Which doesn't necessarily mean you can drop $1,000 on a new rifle. But that does mean you can drop, $100, $150 on a new rifle. They might be thinking, $100, $150 on a rifle? That seems a bit low. Because let's face it, guns are expensive, and good guns should theoretically cost good amounts of money. That, unfortunately, is not exactly the case. Right here, I have the Mosin Nagant. This gun right here, after everything, cost me a grand total of $175. And this thing is every bit as accurate as a gun that would cost 10 times as much. Now, before we actually take this thing out and shoot it, just to prove how awesome it really is, let's first take a look at a bit of its history. The story of the Mosin Nagant begins in 1889. Essentially, the military was attempting to find a new infantry rifle. And two of the rifles submitted were from Captain Mosin of the Imperial Russian Army and Belgian designer Nagant. And when these two rifles were evaluated, the decision was actually split. Nagant's rifle, while better manufactured, was fairly complicated and took a great deal of time to disassemble. Mosin's rifle, while being simpler to manufacture, was also manufactured to a lower quality, and there were a decent number of stoppages. However, once his rifle was selected, he would later refine it with some of Nagant's design elements. And the rifle itself would be adopted as the 3-line rifle Model 1891. Now, when these details were borrowed from Nagant, Nagant didn't necessarily like this, and would actually file a patent dispute. Now, for a wide variety of reasons, the Russian government just went ahead and paid him 200,000 rubles. Which was the same exact amount that Mosin was paid. Now, why is the rifle actually called Mosin Nagant when the two didn't work on it? Well, this actually comes from Western sources, as the rifle is not actually called that in Russia itself. In theory, and I could be wrong here, the rifle is called the Vintovka Mosina. Now, my example of Mosin Nagant is the M91 version. It was by far the most prolific version of the rifle and was standard issue to all Soviet infantry from the year 1930 to 1945. And my God, would I have hated to do some CQB with this long bastard. It was also unsurprisingly used as a long-range sharpshooting rifle. The rifle I have here was produced in 1943. And I have replaced the front sight with a scope mount. Now, one must also be sure that when one actually does do something like this, that they ensure that the scope mount is actually secured quite well to the weapon, so that the scope can hold a zero, because if it does not actually get secured to the weapon all that well, the scope will have a tendency to wander a bit, thus making the rifle fairly inaccurate. The scope I have here is a 7-power scope. Other than the scope, this rifle is stock as the day it was made. Now, before we go punch some paper, I would like to relate a fairly amusing story. When I took this thing out to the range for this particular video, I ended up actually meeting a legitimate Russian guy who, of course, immediately recognized my Mosin Nagant and had to show off his Mosin Nagant, which was a bit more modified than mine, complete with a turn-down bolt and a synthetic stock. While he didn't actually speak all that much English, and I'm pretty sure he didn't understand a word I said, there is one thing we both agreed on, to be certain, and that was, it's a very good gun. So now, let's take this thing out and see if we can keep it in the 10 ring. As you can see, the rifle itself is really quite accurate. And while there are a few outliers on here, more or less everything was kept towards the center of the target. And it's pretty amazing considering that this is roughly a chest-sized target hit from 100 yards away. And with my bad eyesight, there's no way I could have done it without the scope. Now, you also have to take into consideration that the rifle itself is probably more accurate than I am. Prior to acquiring the Mosin Nagant, I had no reason to shoot 100 yards away. Usually I stayed around 50 to 25. So really, even with limited practice, this rifle can still hit a fairly small target accurately. So is this rifle worth picking up? Or should it simply be left to rot in an armory somewhere? Well, I have to say it's certainly worth picking up, either for the shootist that does not want to spend a great deal of money or doesn't have a great deal of money. The weapon is accurate, reliable, and infinitely modifiable. Now you might be asking yourself, why would I want to spend $100 on a rifle just to spend another $300 to modify it? And I say it's worth modifying because it is so reliable. Sure, you can get a modern rifle for that price, but will it be as brute force simple and brute force reliable as this thing? Essentially, you can do pretty much anything you want to this rifle and it will survive and it will always shoot. And ultimately, when it comes to a firearm, that's what you want it to do. This may not be the most pretty firearm, it may not be the most buttery smooth action, but the fact is, it will always cycle around and it will always fire around. Now you need to be at least a little bit knowledgeable for going out and purchasing one of these, because if you spend $100 on a rifle without actually checking it out, it might have a bad bore, its magazine might not be reliable, or you might have a really bad bolt. Now that's another thing you need to watch out for. If the bolt doesn't actually cycle all that well, you probably have sticky bolt. And these days you can find fixes for that all over the interwebs, including YouTube. Now my rifle, when I first picked it up, didn't actually have sticky bolt or magazine problems. But it did have some dried on cosmoline around the bore. And that simply required a quick cleaning that took about 15 minutes, and as you can see, it cycled around easily every time. And so, this is General Lotz telling you to always keep them in the 10 ring.